It was exactly 11:42 p.m. A rainy Tuesday when the crushing silence of that 50-room mansion was finally miraculously broken. Victoria ran a $40 billion corporate empire, yet she just froze at her mahogany desk. This wasn't some midnight intruder, nor a frantic call about a corporate crisis on the line. It was something her vast wealth couldn't buy, a sound absent for 2 years, 4 months, and 16 days. Laughter. Her little girl's laughter. Shaking, she pulled up the high-definition security cameras, absolutely sure her mind was playing cruel tricks. But that glowing screen showed a reality so deep, so profound it completely shattered the perfect world her money had built. The Kensington property swallowed 400 acres of heavily guarded, flawless land up in New York. From the street, it looked like an absolute architectural masterpiece. A massive, untouchable fortress made of glass, steel, and imported marble. But inside it felt like a tomb. You and I know the type. Billionaire CEO Victoria Kensington built this massive palace just to hide. Just 38, she was an absolute titan. People in boardrooms from Wall Street to Tokyo called her a woman made of pure ice. She closed billion-dollar deals without blinking once, tearing apart rival businesses with brutal precision. Yet all that power was just heavy armor, meant to bury the pain of an unthinkable family tragedy. 2 years back, a horrific crash on Interstate 95 completely destroyed Victoria's seemingly perfect life. Her loving husband, Jonathan, a gifted architect whose bright laugh could warm up the coldest room, died instantly when a massive freight truck lost control during a blinding rainstorm and crushed their vehicle. Their 5-year-old daughter Lily was in the back. Lily walked away with barely a scratch, but the mental scars were utterly devastating. That sweet, energetic little girl who always sang at the top of her lungs and chased butterflies outside was entirely lost in that twisted metal. Ever since that awful night, Lily had refused to say a single word. She never shed a tear, she never even smiled. She faded into a ghost inside her own house, only offering blank stares and tiny nods. Victoria threw endless millions at the problem. She brought in elite neurologists, famous trauma therapists, and every expensive healer available. She even transformed an entire wing into a high-tech sensory therapy clinic. But nothing worked. Let's be honest. Fancy medical terms like dissociative mutism were just expensive excuses for a mother's helplessness. Eaten alive by grief and a dark, heavy guilt for missing that car ride, Victoria buried herself entirely in her corporate empire. Since wealth couldn't heal her child, she decided to conquer the corporate world instead. She turned into an absent parent, funding absolutely everything, but completely unable to emotionally face the broken shell of her little girl. Lily's daily life was managed by an endless, highly paid army of elite nannies, private tutors and staff, though nobody stayed long. That thick, heavy silence filling the mansion was just too miserable for most to handle. Then along came Thomas Bennett. He was never actually hired to watch Lily. His job was simply being the estate's new head groundskeeper. Victoria's lead assistant managed all the hiring, seeing only a 34-year-old single dad who brought totally flawless landscaping references to the table. Just a desperate need for basic on-site employee housing. Victoria blindly signed the paperwork, granting Thomas and his 5-year-old son, Leo, permission to live in the tiny gatehouse on her massive estate. To her, this employee was just another paid extra in her wealthy, isolated life. Glancing from her luxury office, she only ever saw a tall, working shadow. A broad-shouldered guy with calloused hands, sun-baked skin, and a totally quiet presence. He wore heavy flannel shirts every day, regardless of the brutal summer heat. Often his little boy, Leo, trailed close behind him, carrying a plastic watering can or playing in the dirt. For 3 whole months, the CEO and groundskeeper never spoke one single word. He kept her massive gardens perfect. She kept her global empire running. Money and status divided them, completely masking the deep sorrow they both shared. But stick with me, a priceless shift was happening on the estate's grounds. While expensive nannies scrolled phones in air-conditioned rooms, her daughter Lily started wandering outside alone. She would stand near the perfectly cut grass, quietly watching Thomas work. Thomas never chased her away. He didn't fake those pitying smiles like the highly paid therapists always did. He just worked, casually handing Lily a flower bulb or pointing out a resting ladybug. Then there was little Leo. This messy, vibrant kid didn't care at all that the billionaire's daughter was broken. To Leo, Lily was just a friend. He'd run circles around her, sharing soggy crackers or rambling about his toy trucks. She stayed silent, but for the first time in forever, she didn't run away. Victoria missed all of this. Trapped in her wealthy glass tower fighting corporate wars, she was totally blind to the priceless healing downstairs. She firmly believed that this bitter, cold, costly fortress she built was the only way to survive. But we're about to see her costly fortress walls come crashing down. It happened on a Tuesday, right before midnight. A brutal summer storm hammered the massive estate, rain violently smashing against her office's custom floor-to-ceiling windows. That wild storm perfectly matched her stressful, chaotic desk. She was ruthlessly closing a massive European shipping company takeover. A billion-dollar deal demanding her absolute undivided focus. Her expensive scotch sat near the keyboard, glowing faintly under the computer monitors. Next to her phone sat the elite security hub, a top-tier system watching every inch of the property, streaming high-definition video and audio from 90 different cameras straight to her desk. Usually it just showed empty hallways and wealthy rain-soaked lawns. She was drafting a ruthless corporate email when it happened. Listen to this. A sharp, breathless noise cutting right through the audio feed's static. Her manicured fingers froze over the keyboard. She blinked, heart pounding against her ribs as she stared at the screen. Camera 14's audio in the East Conservatory was suddenly bouncing wildly. She leaned in, holding her breath. You might think wealth fixes everything, but beneath that heavy storm, I heard an impossible sound. A giggle, a bright, genuine, entirely unpurchasable childhood laugh. The blood completely drained from my face. It just seemed impossible. I hadn't heard that sweet sound since the morning of the accident. With trembling fingers, I tapped my expensive security system, pulling up the East Conservatory live feed. It was a massive glass-domed room packed with imported exotic plants. A lavish sanctuary Jonathan designed himself. Bathed in the silver glow of my high-tech cameras, I saw 3 figures on screen. It was Thomas, our groundskeeper. He sat cross-legged right on the cold stone floor. Beside him sat his son Leo wearing dinosaur pajamas. And directly across from them, clutching her knees to her chest, was my Lily. My breath caught. Why was a worker in my main house at midnight? Why was Lily awake? Where was the highly paid night nanny? My first instinct was a fierce surge of protective maternal rage. You see, my instinct was power. I reached to summon my security detail to arrest the trespasser. But my hand just hovered in the air as I watched the scene unfold there. Thomas wasn't doing anything threatening. He held a basic industrial flashlight, pointing it straight at the blank white stucco wall. He was casting shadow puppets, but these weren't just random shapes. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes widening in pure disbelief. His rough hands moved with a practiced grace, forming deeply intricate, specific silhouettes. First a bird with articulated wings, next a tree bending in the wind. Finally, he twisted his hands, moving his thumbs and pinkies in a very specific galloping motion. It was a fox, a dancing. I gasped loudly, immediately covering my mouth with my hand. My vision instantly blurred with tears. The dancing fox and the moon, that was Jonathan's special story. It was the deeply personal, complex shadow puppet routine my late husband invented just for Lily. He created it when she was 3, perfecting those difficult hand gestures over several months. He performed it every time a thunderstorm hit, just to keep our little girl from feeling afraid. Nobody else knew those gestures. No one else knew the exact order of those shadow animals. Jonathan had never written it down. It was a priceless private ritual between a father and his daughter. On my screen, Thomas made that shadow fox leap right toward the shadow moon. Leo giggled loudly, but my eyes were locked entirely on my precious Lily. Lily's beautiful face was perfectly illuminated by that flashlight spill. Her large, normally vacant eyes were wide and sparkling, a massive radiant smile stretched across her face. Then, as the shadow fox tripped and tumbled down an imaginary hill, Lily threw her head back. The microphone picked it up perfectly, a loud, bell-like, purely joyous laugh. I broke down. A heavy sob tore through my throat in my cold, empty executive office. I watched my daughter laugh again and again. That sound washed over me like a miracle. You and I know money couldn't buy this split second. 2 suffocating years lifted off my chest. My daughter was still in there. My little girl wasn't actually gone. But then that priceless miracle was immediately eclipsed by a chilling, paralyzing wave of suspicion. Victoria stared at Thomas's face on the cold security monitor. He smiled softly at Lily, showing a mix of deep sadness and gentle warmth. "Who are you?" Victoria wondered as her cold, calculating corporate instincts instantly took over. How could he possibly know her late husband's deeply kept secret? Her wealthy mind raced through dark scenarios. Was Thomas a stalker? Had he been observing her family long before the tragic accident? Was he secretly connected to the fatal crash itself? You and I know money cannot buy healing. This simple laborer just bypassed millions in expensive therapies using a secret piece of her family's past. Victoria wiped away genuine tears, letting her face harden into protective stone. For once, she did not use her power to summon security. If she scared him off, all her wealth could never buy the truth. Worse, she might traumatize Lily again, losing the one thing money couldn't replace. Instead, Victoria hit record on the advanced security hub, locking the priceless footage inside an encrypted server. She watched the glowing screen until Thomas gently clicked off the flashlight. He walked Lily back to the massive mansion, then vanished into the heavy rain with his son. Victoria never slept that night. She sat in the dark, constantly replaying that footage of her laughing child, while preparing her corporate empire for war. By 6 a.m. the next morning, the severe storm had passed, leaving her sprawling estate wrapped in thick fog. Victoria sat rigidly at the head of the expensive dining table, nursing a bitter cup of coffee. She was still wearing the exact same clothes from the night before. Across the grand table stood Winston, her highly paid head of security. Winston was a former intelligence spy, an expert in corporate espionage, threat assessment, and making costly problems quietly vanish. "I need a complete, absolute teardown of this man," Victoria commanded, sliding an expensive tablet across the polished wood. The high-tech screen showed a still image of Thomas Bennett's face, softly lit by that simple flashlight. "I want everything: birth records, banking history, phone calls, internet data. I need to know absolutely every single place he has lived, everyone he has spoken to in the past decade, and I want it all in 2 hours." Her hired muscle didn't ask questions. He just nodded, grabbed the shiny device, and exited the room. "Stick with me here." Those 2 hours were Victoria's absolute longest. She paced her luxurious office, staring out the massive window toward the humble gatehouse. Through the fog, she watched Thomas gently pruning rose bushes, while his son Leo played happily in the simple mud. He looked so ordinary, but let's be honest, her wealthy paranoia refused to trust that. In her corporate world, everyone had an angle. Everyone wanted a profitable piece of her Kensington empire. At 8:15 a.m. Winston returned, completely lacking his usual expensive stoic composure. He looked truly rattled as he dropped a thick investigative folder onto Victoria's expensive desk. "You were absolutely right to be suspicious, Miss Kensington," Winston confessed quietly. "The man working in your garden is not a simple groundskeeper, and his name isn't Thomas Bennett." Victoria snatched the file, quickly flipping it open. "Who is he?" "His real name is Thomas Holden," Winston nervously explained. "Bennett is his deceased mother's maiden name. He used it to bypass your expensive background checks, which were far too blind for a security hire. I will be speaking with human resources." "Skip the corporate report, Winston. Just tell me about Holden." 5 years ago, my investigator Winston told me, tapping a document. "Thomas Holden was a top pediatric trauma surgeon at St. Jude's Hospital. He was a prodigy, board certified and highly decorated." I just stared at the photograph pinned to his medical license. A younger, clean-shaven Thomas stared back in scrubs, smiling with total confidence. "A trauma surgeon. You're probably wondering what I did. Why is he planting my tulips?" "He lost his medical license 2 years ago," Winston said, his voice dropping. "Victoria, he lost it exactly 2 years, 4 months, and 16 days ago." My blood turned to ice, the exact date of the accident. I stared up at Winston, heavy dread twisting in my stomach. "Tell me." "The night of the deadly crash on Interstate 95, Winston began with care, Doctor. Holden was driving home after working a brutal double shift. His pregnant wife, Sarah, was sitting right there in the passenger seat beside him. They were right behind your husband's SUV when the massive freight truck lost control. All the air left my lungs, my hands gripped the heavy wood of my desk. Holden wasn't just a bystander, Winston went on. When the vehicles collided, your husband's SUV flipped over the guardrail and caught fire. Holden slammed his brakes. He told Sarah to stay back and call 911, then sprinted straight toward the wreckage. Winston reached down into the folder and pulled out heavily redacted police files and local fire department logs. The official story our high-paid legal team fed you was that emergency crews arrived in time to save Lily, but they arrived entirely too late for Jonathan. That was a total lie spun by our crisis PR team to limit corporate liability, because the exact freight truck that caused this whole accident was secretly operated by one of our own subsidiary shell companies. A sickening wave of absolute nausea washed right over me. My vast corporate wealth caused the crash, my expensive lawyers lied to my face. The truth, Victoria, Winston said softly, finally using my first name, is that those rescue trucks were delayed by the storm. Dr. Holden was completely alone out there. The SUV doors were totally jammed shut. Holden shattered that back glass using nothing but his bare hands. He crawled right into the burning vehicle. He found Lily pinned beneath the seat. It took 4 agonizing minutes to free her. In that time, he suffered brutal third-degree burns up both of his arms. I gasped, suddenly realizing why Thomas always wore long flannel shirts in the sweltering summer heat. He was hiding his burn scars. He pulled Lily out and carried her to the grassy shoulder. Winston said. He performed emergency triage, perfectly stabilizing her fragile spine. While he was doing all that, he kept talking to her so she'd stay awake. He saw her crying in absolute terror from the raging storm and the flames. The police file notes a witness saw Holden making hand puppets against the side of an ambulance, just to distract the little girl while they waited for the real paramedics to finally arrive. I realized he must have seen Jonathan doing them for Lily in the car right before the crash. Hot tears were streaming freely down my face by now. This penniless stranger had walked straight into a raging inferno just to save my baby girl. He kept her alive. You and I both know money can't buy miracles. Why didn't I know? I choked out, slamming my fist hard onto my expensive desk. Why wasn't he given a medal? Why on earth is he pulling my weeds for minimum wage? Winston's face tightened with real regret, because of what came next. While Holden saved Lily, a drunk driver, blind from the rain and smoke, crashed right through the police barricades. The driver slammed straight into Holden's parked car. The room went completely dead silent. Victoria just stopped breathing. His wife Sarah died instantly, Winston said softly. The unborn baby didn't make it either. Holden lost his entire world while he pulled your daughter from that fire. Victoria collapsed into her expensive leather chair, burying her face in her hands. A raw cry of pure agony and deep horror ripped from her lips. You and I know money can't fix this kind of monstrous, cruel injustice. She felt the ground totally give way. And Kensington Industries, Victoria whispered through her falling tears. What did we do? Our lawyers just saw a massive liability nightmare, Winston admitted, looking completely ashamed. If the public knew an off-duty hero lost his pregnant wife because our corporate truck caused a fatal pileup, the massive settlement would have bankrupted our entire logistics wing. So our powerful legal team quietly squeezed the medical board. They completely twisted the narrative. They claimed Holden acted recklessly at the crash site, wrongly moving victims and blocking the EMTs. They buried him under lawsuits. They got his medical license revoked. They ruined his life simply to protect the company's precious stock price. Victoria stared at the security monitor. The feed showed Thomas down in the garden. He was actually laughing as his young son Leo sprayed him with a garden hose. Think about it. This man sacrificed his wife, his unborn child, his career, and his reputation just to save Lily. And Victoria's massive empire rewarded him by grinding a hero into absolute dust. He is not here to garden, Winston muttered, drawing his weapon slightly from its holster, a cold reflex of his deadly profession. He bypassed all our expensive background checks. He embedded himself inside your home. A broken man with absolutely nothing left to lose, destroyed by your power. Miss Kensington, he is here for pure revenge. I need to detain him right now. No, Victoria screamed, leaping up to her feet. Don't you dare touch him. She looked right back at the glowing screen. She remembered the deeply gentle way he looked at her daughter Lily the night before. He didn't break into that fancy conservatory to hurt her. He broke in just to make her laugh. He was no threat. He was just a broken angel checking on the only life he managed to save on the worst night of his existence. Victoria ignored Winston, marching toward the heavy oak doors of her grand office. The wealthy Ice Queen was dead. The mother and the human who owed a massive debt of blood and life had finally awakened. "Where are you going?" Winston asked, sounding alarmed. "To tear down my own corporate empire," Victoria said, her eyes burning with a fierce resolve, "and to beg for his forgiveness." The heavy, expensive oak doors of the Kensington estate swung wide open, and the billionaire stepped out into the biting, bitter morning chill. She still wore her perfectly tailored trousers and expensive silk blouse from the night before. Her bare feet just slipped hastily into a pair of plain rain boots. The fog was thick, curling around her expensive marble statues and perfectly manicured hedges like smoke. She walked with a desperate, frantic energy, her rubber boots sinking deep into the wet mud. Across the expansive south lawn, she finally saw him. Thomas knelt right there in the dirt, carefully tying a young, storm-battered oak sapling to a wooden stake. You see, a few yards away, little Leo sat on a simple plastic bucket. He hummed quietly, digging a muddy trench with a simple, cheap, yellow plastic shovel. The billionaire approached, but all her vast wealth could not silence her crunching boots. Thomas stood, wiping his humble soil-stained hands on his worn denim jeans. His spine stiffened completely. He noticed her red, swollen eyes. All her corporate power could not hide that fierce, broken expression. He knew immediately she had watched that hidden footage. "Thomas," murmured, his voice remarkably calm and steady, "head into the gatehouse and wash your hands. I will be right there." The 5-year-old boy offered the wealthy CEO a priceless, gap-toothed smile, then trotted toward the stone cottage. Thomas faced her with a set jaw. He offered no hollow corporate apologies or excuses. He stood like a man facing a firing squad, bravely ready to accept his grim fate. "Miss Kensington," he started, his tone unwavering, "I know exactly why you are out here. I had no business being in your grand mansion last night. I crossed a line. I will pack our belongings immediately." Victoria stopped 10 feet from him, her chest heaving heavily. She stared at this quiet man she had carelessly treated like easily replaceable, invisible machinery. Suddenly she recognized the phantom scars beneath his cheap flannel. "Dr. Thomas Holden," she whispered, the painful realization tearing at her throat. Thomas froze completely. The color drained entirely from his pale face. His calm mask shattered, replaced instantly by profound, hunted, and absolute panic. His fearful eyes darted toward the gatehouse where his precious son had just vanished, as if calculating how fast he could snatch up his boy and run. "How do you?" Thomas stammered, stepping backward. Victoria could not hold it together anymore. Her knees completely buckled. Let's be honest, all her Wall Street billions meant nothing as she collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. "I had no idea," she wept into her hands. The falling rain began to drizzle again, washing away her powerful facade. "I swear to you, Thomas, upon my little girl's life, I truly did not know." Utterly bewildered by this broken executive, Thomas took a very hesitant step toward her. "You didn't know what?" Victoria forced her tearful eyes up to meet his. "I never knew you were the brave man who pulled Lily from those flames. My expensive lawyers told me the paramedics had arrived just in time. They coldly claimed Jonathan died on impact. They hid that a selfless surgeon burned his own arms to rescue my baby girl. They never gave me your name." Thomas's face darkened as profound, agonizing sorrow settled heavily across his weary features. He stared into the fog. "Your money did more than just erase my name, Miss Kensington. Your lawyers erased my life. When the medical board attacked me, your powerful legal team supplied fake testimonies. They ruthlessly claimed I was negligent. They argued my reckless rescue was why your traumatized daughter stopped speaking entirely. For 2 long years, I haven't just mourned my beloved wife. I carried the sickening guilt that I ruined your daughter's mind, all because I refused to wait for the fire department. You see, wealth couldn't heal the sharp, suffocating pain crushing her chest. You didn't break her, Thomas. You saved her soul, those shadow puppets, the dancing fox. You learned that from Jonathan, right?" Thomas nodded slowly, his kind eyes shining with unshed tears. "I saw him making them before the crash. And let me tell you, when I held a screaming Lily on that dark roadside, the car was burning, the storm was raging. I had to check her eyes, but she kept thrashing around. So I made that shadow fox against the ambulance wall. It was the absolute only thing that calmed her. Seeing the job at this massive estate, I didn't come looking for payback. I just needed to know she was all right. She was the only soul I saved that horrific night. Seeing her wandering like a ghost, I had to try. You succeeded, Victoria choked out. Power couldn't fix her. Thomas, for the first time in 2 years, you brought her back. You and I know money cannot buy healing. Only the heavy rain filled their silence. But the CEO wasn't finished. The most painful truth was still coming. Wiping mud from her knees, she stood tall. The ruthless, powerful executive within her took the wheel again. She channeled that grief into a terrifying focus. Thomas, she began, her voice dropping to a fragile whisper. There is something else I only discovered an hour ago. And I need you to listen to me very carefully. Thomas frowned, feeling the heavy shift in the air. That freight truck on Interstate 95, the billionaire said, looking him dead in the eyes. The one that crushed my husband's SUV and started the chain reaction killing Sarah? It belonged to a shell company. Thomas completely stopped breathing. He just stared, his mind racing to connect the pieces. A corporate shell company. Owned by my empire, Kensington Logistics, she confessed, the words tasting like pure ash. My corporation caused the crash. My highly paid lawyers knew our driver was exhausted and those brakes failed inspection. They knew if the public heard about you, the hero doctor losing his pregnant wife to our negligence, the massive backlash and endless lawsuits would tank our stock. So corporate money buried the truth. They buried you to protect me. Think about that betrayal. The deafening silence hung heavy as Thomas stumbled backward. His eyes went wide as the horrific reality finally hit. The billionaire paying his tiny salary, this massive estate he was standing on. All funded by the very empire that slaughtered his family and stole his career. You. Thomas gasped out, his voice cracked with a sudden ferocious rage, hands clenching into fists. Your corporation killed Sarah. Yes, Victoria answered. She held his gaze, refusing to hide behind her wealth anymore. I deserve your anger. My staff lied, but this corporation is my responsibility, my sin. Thomas turned away, pacing violently. He grabbed a wooden stake he had just planted, yanking it from the dirt with a savage guttural roar, and hurled it into the thick fog. He collapsed into the mud, gasping for air as 2 years of pure, suppressed agony finally clawed its way out of his burning throat. Victoria stayed back. She let the broken man rage. She let him grieve. When Thomas finally looked up at her, his eyes were completely hollow. Why confess this to me? Why not just fire me and let me rot? Your money could have buried this forever. Because hiding behind wealth is what destroyed us both, Victoria said fiercely. I am heading to Manhattan today. I am going to burn my own corporate empire to the ground. I will make sure my own board of directors rots in federal prison. But I cannot leave Lily alone, not ever again. You and I know wealth can't heal a soul. She walked over, pulling heavy brass keys from her pocket. She offered them with deep respect. These are the keys to the main house, Victoria said. Move out of the gatehouse today. Take the entire East Wing instead. You and Leo belong here. I swear to fix what my corporate empire destroyed, Dr. Holden. I promise you that. Please just protect my little girl until I finish this fight. Thomas stared at those keys, then up at Victoria. He saw an unyielding fire in her eyes. It wasn't billionaire pity. It was a moral declaration of war. Trembling, he finally took the heavy keys. Up on the 40th floor, the Kensington Tower boardroom was built to project absolute power. A 40-foot solid walnut table dominated the expensive space, surrounded by massive windows showcasing the Manhattan skyline, a monument to money. By 9 a.m. sharp on Monday, the soulless executive board of Kensington Logistics gathered together. David, the chief operating officer, sat there impatiently tapping his expensive gold pen. Right beside him sat Harrison, the general counsel, a man whose tailored suits and slick hair hid a soul entirely devoid of basic humanity. The heavy glass doors slid apart, and Victoria finally entered. Flanked by her security chief Winston, he quietly locked the doors behind her, standing like a stone wall. The room fell silent. Victoria refused to sit. She marched to the head of the table, her face radiating a terrifying, unbuyable moral calm. Good morning, Victoria, Harrison greeted smoothly, flipping open a binder. We have Q3 projections ready. I'd like to discuss the European shipping merger now. "Shut your mouth, Harrison," Victoria said. Her quiet voice sliced through their corporate arrogance like a razor-sharp surgical scalpel. Harrison blinked hard, his smug, arrogant smile quickly faded away. "Excuse me?" Victoria grabbed a small remote control and clicked a button. The massive display at the end of the boardroom suddenly flickered to life. "Let's watch profits clash with reality." The screen showed a massive high-resolution photo of the burning Interstate 95 wreckage. Right next to it was the medical license of Dr. Thomas Holden, stamped with a giant red revoked, all the blood drained from Harrison's face. David dropped his gold pen. The greedy board sat in stunned, panicked, terrified silence. 2 years ago, Victoria started, her voice bouncing off the expensive glass walls. A subsidiary freight truck ignored federal safety rules, lost control, and killed my beloved husband. A brave pediatric surgeon named Thomas Holden walked straight into the fire to save my daughter. In return, this very board, led by our ruthless general counsel, engineered a massive, illegal cover-up just to protect our fragile stock price. You destroyed an innocent man, burying brutal evidence of corporate manslaughter, and lied to your CEO. Harrison jumped up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "Victoria, you're deeply distressed. You have no idea what you are talking about. This is a massive breach of company protocol." "Sit down," Winston barked from the heavy doors, hand resting casually near his holstered sidearm. Harrison swallowed hard, slowly sinking right back into his expensive leather chair. "You thought my grief meant you could trade human lives for cash, running my empire like a cartel," Victoria continued. Leaning over the table, her furious eyes locked onto Harrison's utterly terrified gaze. "You actually calculated that the irreplaceable life of my husband, the beautiful mind of my daughter, and the family of Dr. To them, lives were just acceptable losses for a wealthy ledger." "Victoria, be reasonable," David begged, sweating through his expensive suit. "If this leaks, our billion-dollar stock is going to tank. The feds will investigate everything. Our massive logistics empire will be completely ruined." "It will ruin your wealth," Victoria just smiled a cold, predatory smile. "David, you still think power matters," she whispered. "I don't care about the money." She hit a button on the remote. The display shifted, showing a long list of digital email receipts. 30 minutes ago, Victoria stated calmly. "Winston and I dumped the legal department's entire highly encrypted server. Sent Harrison's secret messages about the crash straight to the Department of Justice, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the New York Times editorial desk." Absolute chaos erupted. The wealthy executives leaped up, screaming in sheer panic. Harrison lunged for his phone, but Winston stepped right up, shaking his head. "The building is locked down," Victoria yelled over the panic, her voice ringing with total authority. "The FBI is waiting downstairs. They hold warrants for corporate fraud, witness tampering, and even manslaughter. Your money won't save you. You're leaving in handcuffs." Harrison stared right back at Victoria with pure, unadulterated venom. "You just destroyed your corporate legacy, burned your own empire down." "No, Harrison," she replied, turning away as police sirens started wailing from the city streets far below their ivory tower. "I am just clearing the wreckage. Stick with me." 6 months later, her estate transformed entirely. The heavy, suffocating silence of empty wealth was finally gone. Thick velvet curtains were pulled wide open, letting warm sunlight flood those expensive marble floors. Her once perfect lawns were now happily littered with bright plastic toy trucks, soccer balls, and messy, muddy footprints. Victoria rested on a stone bench inside the bright East Conservatory. Gone were the tailored suits. She wore a simple sweater, hair in a messy bun. She read a novel, sipping tea, watching the beautiful chaos, because you and I know true joy cannot be bought with corporate shares. Her massive logistics empire barely survived the sweeping legal purge. Victoria stepped down as CEO, taking a quiet chairman role while the entire business restructured itself. She willingly cashed out a massive chunk of her personal stock, pouring those billions into a brand new foundation for pediatric trauma, named after the victims. And the chief medical director was none other than Dr. Thomas Holden, his medical license fully and very publicly reinstated by the apologetic state medical board. "Got you," a young voice yelled. Little Leo, completely covered in dirt, sprinted past her bench holding a stolen stuffed bunny. Quick little footsteps chased right behind him. "Leo, give it back." Victoria lowered the book, a gentle, priceless smile touching her lips. It was Lily. She was actually running, cheeks flushed with life, eyes bright and totally focused. Her voice sounded a bit raspy from disuse, but it grew stronger every single day. Thomas strolled into the sunny room carrying 2 simple juice boxes. He wore a casual shirt with rolled-up sleeves, openly showing the burn scars on his arms. He didn't need to hide anymore. His scars were badges of honor, proof he survived the fire when my wealth fixed nothing. He handed me a juice box, sitting down right beside me on that park bench. We sat in an easy, comfortable silence, watching our kids play. There was no rushed romance between us. No amount of power could heal our deep wounds, but we shared a profoundly unbreakable bond. We were simply 2 broken survivors who had pulled each other from the total wreckage of our pasts to build a real family. She read a whole page of her book aloud this morning, Thomas whispered softly. His eyes tracked my Lily as she tackled Leo, giggling hysterically while reclaiming her stuffed rabbit. Her therapist says she is light years ahead of expectations, I replied to him. I looked at Thomas with profound gratitude. But she still begs for those shadow puppets whenever it rains. Thomas chuckled, a warm sound. I'm running out of animals, Victoria. I had to invent a dancing hippopotamus last night. It honestly just looked like a potato. I laughed, resting my head against the cold stone wall behind us, feeling the sunlight warm my face. Suddenly, my daughter stopped wrestling with Leo. She looked over at our bench, her bright little eyes locking right onto Thomas. Scrambling to her feet, she ran over and grabbed his calloused, scarred hand. Thomas, she demanded, her voice ringing clear with the beautifully bossy tone of a happy 5-year-old. Do the fox again. Thomas looked at me. I nodded back, my eyes shining with happy tears I no longer hid. He turned back to Lily, raising his hands. His thumbs and pinkies slid perfectly into place. My money failed, but the ice finally melted. Our cold corporate fortress was finally a home. What a journey. You and I now know the truth. True heroism actually happens quietly, right in the shadows. And all the executive power in the world cannot heal a broken heart like human connection can. Tell me, would you have the courage to destroy your own financial empire to do what is right? If this story of a father's sacrifice and my own fierce maternal redemption and the pure, unbreakable resilience of children touched your heart, please hit that like button and share this video so we can spread the message. Subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss out on these vital, true-to-life stories. I really want to hear from you. What was the absolute biggest twist in this journey? Was it the quiet revelation of those shadow puppets? Or the moment I finally locked my powerful board of directors inside? Drop a comment right below and join the discussion.